Welcome everyone to our second Track Talks feature focused webinar. Our first one was last month where we talked about just some tips for getting started and how to import or add your first animal. The goal of the topic we're going to talk about today is reproductive efficiency and how you can use bioTrack Plus to keep track of your breeding records, your preg checks, and that sort of thing. We're going to talk about both single sire and multi-sire matings, the difference in terms of how to enter breeding events for a single sire versus a multi-sire group. And when I say single sire, I just mean that you know who the sire is. Potentially, if you're using something like a marking harness, maybe you have 3 or 4 rams or bucks in one pen, but you are able to determine to some degree which male has covered the female. Whereas a multi-sire group would be if you just didn't track that in any way and you just had a whole group of animals in a pen with the ewes or does or cows. I will probably keep switching back interchangeably between species here, but take it if I say a terminology to refer to any of them unless we talk about otherwise. So we'll talk about how to add breeding events, how to add pregnancy check events, and also some features around if you add breeding events, the consequences when you get to adding your offspring from those breedings. So to get started, as usual, all of the different events and information for bioTrack Plus are on the left-hand side. So I've put together a little bit of an example. This is a sheep flock that I started creating. So I started by adding 200 ewes. Half of them were Rideaus, half were Dorsets. And then I added 20 rams. Some were Rideau, some were Dorset, and some were Suffolk, is kind of emulating as if you're doing like a terminal crossbreeding system where you're also trying to maintain your replacements here. So what I've done is added my base animals, and then we will go over to our breeding events tab where we can see that I've entered in some breeding. So what I imagined here is that we put rams in with the ewes for one breeding cycle and then pulled them and then put them back in for a second breeding cycle. It's kind of a cleanup type thing. So the first one, we're more worried about keeping our replacements. So we do have some way of capturing the sires of those breedings. And then the second one was like a cleanup where all of the breedings were through multi-sire groups. So in terms of adding breeding events in bioTrack Plus, I will click in here and look at the form. So first of all, we need to add animal to the breeding. Let me just pick, we'll just pick a cow here that I know will work. Actually, no, we'll pick a goat. Okay, so we add our animal in here. The second question, always when we're adding new event data, is to add an event date. Now, the thing about breeding events is that you have both a start of breeding and an end of breeding if you're doing natural sire, as well as an AI date. What I've been typically doing as a convention is using the start of breeding as event date, but you can pick a different system or even just use the event date as when you imported the record. What I would caution you there is if you happen to start, maybe you start with a certain breeding group and you enter that information, but then wanted to go back and add previous breeding groups, in order for the event dates to make sense when you're looking at, say, the charts on reproductive efficiency, it wouldn't make sense if the breedings that happened earlier had later event dates. So just keep that in mind. Next is a breeding season. Breeding season or breeding group is a group of animals that were all bred at the same time, potentially to the same group of sires. There's lots of flexibility here in terms of how you manage your breeding seasons. Maybe you only do one breeding season per breeding season. Maybe you divide it more based on like which sires you have in which groups. It's really up to you in terms of how you manage that. Let's see if I have any breeding seasons here. Breeding method can either be natural services or AI. Depending on what you click here, it's going to change the other fields that are options here. So if I select natural services, we'll see a panel on the right appear, and then that has some information about our natural service, such as the exposure dates, etc. In natural services, we can either select that it is a single sire group, in which case we can add a specific sire ID, or if we say it's not a single sire, then it gives you the option to add a multi-sire group instead. Okay. We have our exposure start and end dates, and then based on that, if you put in an exposure start date and end date, when you save it, it should give you estimated due dates. So let's say August 1st to September 1st was our start and end dates. And then how it determines this is based on like a pre-programmed gestation length based on the species. It is possible to change that number if you know that your flock or herd tends to birth a little bit earlier or later. And then you can also include any comments, as well as the by whom field would be useful if, for example, you're doing AI breedings and you want to keep track of which vet is performing which breedings. Maybe you can find some interesting insights in terms of success versus one technician versus the other, that kind of thing. That's when you might put something in the by whom field. So if I just go ahead and save this breeding. Okay, so then we have our estimated due date here. So there's two different ways that we can add our breedings. We can either go to the breeding tab and click new, or we can go from an individual animal. Let's go find a cow. So if I go into this specific cow and go to the animal events tab, and then under the menu here in the grid where it has all of the events, we can go to new and then scroll down to breeding. And that pulls up my same breeding form here. Let's say instead we're actually going to use AI on this cow. Our gestation length is set at 283 days. We can go and look for an AI sire. That one. I'll put that our AI date is my event date here. And there's a few other options in terms of you can specify the cane, the technician or vet that did the AI, the vet clinic, and you can also record costs to events as well. Okay, so now we have an estimated due date here. So as I mentioned, when we're adding breedings, you can either do a single sire or a multi-sire breeding. So before you can add any animals or add any breedings that have a multi-sire group as the sire, you do have to create that group first. So that's in the same groups tab that you would add your birth seasons. We go to groups, and then we click new. We can just call this maybe 2023 rams. And under group type, we are going to select the multi-sire group. The rest of the information here is all pretty much the same as any other group type. And the one special thing about multi-sire groups is that you can select a location, and if those rams weren't already at that location, like for example, if you had a location called your ram battery or your bull battery, and then you added them into a specific pasture or something like that, when you put that location as the location of this multi-sire group and then click save, it's going to create a movement record for that ram or bull or buck as well. Once we save the group, then the grid appears below where we can actually add animals into this group. So you can either add existing animals just by searching for some of these. So now I have all of my potential rams here. So if you organize your rams based on different like herd letters for the different breeds potentially, it can be really quick and easy to add animals to the multi-sire group if you just type in the herd letters or something like that. So then I can just select all of the ones that fall under that group at once. Once I pick the ones that I want, I'm just going to select add. And then we'll see this bar appear at the top here where it says it's associating the record with this group. And once it's done, we now have a list of all of the rams that are part of that group. Once we have the group created and then the rams added into it, then we can use this group when we're creating breeding events. Once we have our breeding events in here, of course, we can go and look at some like statistics about this. We have all of our information here in terms of, I have some that were multi-sire bred, I have some that were single sires, and of course I can filter all this information down, or I can take a look at the charts and see what information we have. So here we can see that I did 400 breedings in the month of December. If you were using both natural services and AI, you could see the number of each. And of course, this does filter the data down. So instead, for example, we select natural services, it'll drill down to show only the breedings that were natural services on the right. Also have another graph, breeding method by season. So this just basically gives you a count of the number of breedings over time. There's probably lots of other things that would be interesting to get some statistics on here. I always encourage it if you have an idea of, oh, I would like to see the information this way, just send me an email because it's pretty easy to add new graphs and things in here. Right now we just have these two, but if you think of anything that would be useful to add for you, just let me know. Once we have our breeding methods in, next thing we may or may not be doing is entering in PregCheck records. So that's under the pregnancy events tab. For the pregnancy events, I'll just go into one so that we can look at the form. Again, we need to specify an animal. You can add a breeding season that this is associated with, which particularly might be useful if, for example, you had set up different breeding seasons for like they're different breeds of sires or different groups of sires, and you wanted to be able to look at the success of the breedings by those groups, then it would be useful to make sure you add in your breeding season. We have a pregnancy check date, pregnancy status, either being pregnant or open, number of progeny expected. If your technician or vet does an estimate of the number of fetuses, then you could enter that in here as well. Estimated due date will be calculated based on the based on the breeding date, and then you can put in cost, the technician or vet that performed the service, vet clinic, by whom, or any comments that you have. And just as an example, we'll just put one in here. Pregnancy checks are relatively straightforward. There's not too many fields to fill in here. And in terms of what information we can look at about our pregnancy events, the first graph just shows us the total number of pregnancy check events that we've done at different times, and you can use that to filter down and look at the preg checks for the specific animals, as well as you can look at pregnancy rates, which is defined here as the percentage that are pregnant of the total number that are have preg checks completed. So here we had 180 that were pregnant and 20 that were open. If I wanted to then go and look at the animals that were open, I could just double click. And so when I added these pregnancy checks, I marked all the ones that were open as potentials for culling. So then, for example, if I wanted to, I could just download this worksheet and then take that out with me when I am running animals through to then pull those ones out to cull. So there we have the list of animals and the ones that we want to cull. So the last thing I wanted to discuss then is rather than doing this on an individual animal basis, if you have larger groups, breedings and pregnancy checks are really easier to import all at once as opposed to doing one for each individual animal. So how we would actually go about importing these records. So I'm going to use breeding events for an example here. As a reminder, if you want to import records, you can download a template right from the program to be able to see what columns of information you need to include. So that'll be up in this top header bar. Way on the right, it may be under these three little dots here, which just are more information. And then we're going to go to Excel templates, download template. And then entity would be whatever type of event you're wanting to download. In this case, we're looking at breedings. And then I'm going to look for the one that's called template. So that's just the basic fields that you need in order to upload a breeding event. Download that. Okay, so now here we have our template. Some of this information is going to be the same for all of them. So for example, probably the whole group is going to be natural services. We can add an event date, and we'll say that that's my start of exposure date. Then maybe I leave them in for, let's say, a month. And let's say I'm going to breed this group to my Redo grams. So then we'll say that this is not a single sire breeding, it's to a multi-sire group. And then we need the list of the animals we're going to breed to. So you can either pull that off of your wand or scale head or any other Excel records that you have. And we also need a breeding season. I'm just going to copy this all down and make sure when you're copying data in Excel that you double check and make sure it's not like adding to the event date here. So it automatically filled the series, and instead I want to just copy that information. So we need one row in this template per animal that we want to add a breeding record for. So just copying and pasting the information is the easiest way to do that. Now I'm going to save this file as a CSV. You can just hit OK when it says that it can't have multiple pages. Now, before I can import this, I need to double check and make sure that I've created this breeding season and this multi-sire group. Otherwise, I'm going to run into lookup errors when I try and import it. So we're going to go back to the Groups tab. And we are going to create our breeding group. What did I call that? All 20 Redo. Group type is a breeding group. Species is sheep. 2020. I've filled in, I've created my fall 20 Redo breeding group. I also need to double check and make sure that I have added the multi-sire group as well. So I think I already have this one. So let's say Redo fall 19 rams. Okay. So you always want to double check and make sure you haven't accidentally like changed how you've referred to something, because that will cause you errors when importing. Or IRAMS fall 19. Okay. Again, it's filled down the series, so I just want to make sure that it's all the same for them. Gonna save, and then we're going to come back to bioTrack and go to our breeding events tab. Remember, when you're importing records, you always want to go to the page of the type of record you want to import first, because the button to import is the same in all the pages. So it's up in the top navigation bar. Under the 3 dots is the option to import from CSV. And then I'll select my file and click Next. And then review mapping. We have to make sure that all of the fields are matching up here. So animal, we have event date. These ones that say do not modify, you can just ignore those ones. We have AI date, AI sire ID, breeding method, breeding season. Now with breeding season, by default is looking for the column called group name. Group name is a special column that's designed to make sure that all the groups are unique across the entire database. So that's important because potentially many people might have a breeding group called fall 2023. So if we don't have a unique column, then the system is not able to determine which group to associate this information to. But when you're signed in within your individual account, it understands which are potential groups within that account. So instead of using the group name column, we're going to type user group name. Comments, exposure dates, and the same for multi-sire group. We are going to change this from group name to user group name. Everything else here is just included because I left it in the template, but potentially you might want to customize the columns that you usually use and just delete these extra ones so you don't have to worry about making sure they're mapped. Once we're happy that we have everything mapped correctly, we're going to click Finish Import and then go to Track Progress. You don't have to go to Track Progress. You can go about doing other things in the program while these records are importing. Okay, so I had 39 processed in this file and 39 were successful. If I want to go see the list of the records that were successful, I can click on that file name. And then we have a failures tab. If there had been any failures, it would tell you why the record failed. And if it was successful, then we have all the breeding events that were created. So you can click on any of these breeding events and go directly to that breeding. We can see here in this breeding, we have now added in due date, and we can go into the breeding season as well and say we wanted a list of all of the ewes that were bred. They will be in here. Now we have all of these breedings and when they happened. These statistics at the bottom here will update. I think it's every 15 minutes. So at first it'll say that there's 0, and then once the system has a chance to recalculate it, then you'll see the total animal numbers here as well. Okay. I know that was a fair bit of information there on imports. If you do try to import files and you want to just send me a version of it just to take a look at, I can always take a look and make sure that there's no problems, or let me know if you do have any errors and you're not sure how to add them. Well, then I'll let everybody get back to their day. The next Track Talks webinar that we are planning is for measuring growth performance and preparing for performance testing. So we'll talk about how to add weights for beef producers, potentially if you're interested in doing bull tests, how you would do that, as well as how you can access Genovis EPDs for the sheep producers, as well as the meat goat GEs as well. So hopefully you guys can join for that one as well. So thanks everyone.